Hello, I'm Amy Hunter, and Executive Director of OutFront Kalamazoo, and welcome to Living Out Front with Amy Hunter, oddly enough. So my guest today is Jay Kaplan, Staff Attorney, LGBTQ HIV Staff Attorney for the ACLU of Michigan. And we're going to have a conversation about some of the gains that the LGBTQ community have made and why it's important that we protect those by voting and in various other ways. So I'm happy to introduce Jay. Hi, Jay. How are you?
Hi, Amy. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thanks for coming on. It's a pleasure to see you, my friend. So can you give us a rundown of some of the great progress we've made since the Whitmer administration has been in Michigan and some things that are in the offing still?
Yeah. There's been a number of things that have happened. When Governor Whitmer first took office, she issued 3 executive orders. One that covered state employment, and she made it clear that LGBTQ employees cannot be discriminated against. She also issued an order with regards to employers that have contracts with the state of Michigan, that they also cannot discriminate based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And then a 3rd executive order that said anyone who is utilizing government services, the different departments of the state government, that they can't be discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So that was the first thing. And then, of course, we had our Secretary of State's office, Jocelyn Benson, issued in November of 2019 a new policy which made it easier for transgender people to be able to get accurate licenses. So in other words, in order to get a gender marker change on your driver's license or state ID, you just have to fill out an affidavit attesting to your gender. You no longer had to show proof of surgery or some change on your birth certificate or on a passport. Mm-hmm. And then November of 2021, Secretary's office offered a 3rd option on the driver's licenses and state ID, that being an X, which would denote for people who identify as gender non-binary. And then we had the Attorney General issue an opinion, I think it was in June of last year, that said that Michigan has a law regarding changing the gender on your birth certificate, and it required that you have to show proof of undergoing surgery. And the Attorney General declared that provision, that requirement, to be unconstitutional and not enforceable by our Michigan Department of Vital Records. So now when one wants to correct their birth certificate regarding gender, you just have to fill out an affidavit again. And you also have the option, in addition to M and F, the X option for those who identify as gender non-binary. And then, of course, the United States Supreme Court in June of 2020 held in a case called Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, that when you discriminate against LGBTQ employees, you do that because of sex, and that violates federal civil rights laws that prohibit sex discrimination. That's real important because in a lot of our federal civil rights laws, as well as Michigan civil rights laws, we don't explicitly mention sexual orientation and gender identity. So next month, the Michigan Supreme Court is going to be hearing a case as to whether or not that Bostock decision means that Michigan civil rights laws that prohibit sex discrimination in employment, housing, education, and public accommodations, does that mean that they cover LGBTQ people? And so the arguments will take place in March. For the first time in more than 2 decades, there's a progressive majority on the Michigan Supreme Court as a result of elections. And we should expect a decision by the end of July, of which we're cautiously optimistic about. So those are just a couple things that positive developments that have happened just in the past 3 years with regards to LGBTQ rights.
Well, that certainly is a lot of stuff. So, and it's important to note that they happen because of electing a progressive statewide slate of statewide offices of governor, attorney general, and the secretary of state.
And Amy, I'm
as well
sorry.
as-
Yeah, I left out one more important thing. I apologize. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services issued a Medicaid policy, and this is very important for members of our transgender community, saying to Michigan Medicaid plans, so Michigan contracts with private insurers to be Medicaid plans. They said, when you're making decisions as to whether you're going to cover a trans-related medical procedure, you have to follow the guidelines of the experts in this transgender health field, that being the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, and or the Endocrine Society. In other words, you can't just arbitrarily have your own guidelines saying we don't cover something or we consider it to be cosmetic. You have to look at what the experts say and what actually the medicine and science says with regards to whether or not something should be covered as medically necessary. So that's a really important thing to increase access to healthcare for the members of the transgender community.
It's a huge thing. As a matter of fact, it's one of the persistent problems for the trans community is access to transition-related care.
Right.
So, was there not a bulletin that went along with that from the Department of Insurance and Financial Services?
Yes, you are a good reminder, Amy. Another thing that did happen with the new administration is Anita Fox, who is the director of the Department of Insurance and Financial Services. They're kind of like the regulatory arm from the state of Michigan regarding insurance companies. And she issued a bulletin last year, 2020 actually, that as a result of the Bostock decision, the U.S. Supreme Court decision, it's very clear that you can't single out LGBTQ people for discrimination by insurance companies as to what they're going to cover. And so insurance companies cannot have like a blanket exclusion on covering trans-affirming care, including surgeries. They have to do an analysis as to whether or not this is medically necessary and making their determinations about whether or not to cover. So that's another big thing. Yeah.
That's another big thing. So the Bostock decision is wonderful precedent, and affects a whole myriad of things.
It has the potential, yeah. And Michigan, I think, might be the first state where the highest court is taking that Bostock decision and deciding, does this mean, people are protected under are completely protected under our state civil rights laws. So not only is this an important case for Michigan, but national organizations are looking at what happens in Michigan to see, maybe in our state courts, we can also successfully make this argument that because of Bostock, civil rights laws that prohibit sex discrimination cover LGBTQ people.
And you're speaking specifically about the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, correct?
Correct, yes, which covers employment, housing, education, and public accommodations.
So it's all encompassing.
Yeah. It would make it clear that LGBTQ people in Michigan are provided with these comprehensive protections against discrimination.
That's great. So a lot of these advances that we've made, however, are things that are policy changes that are specific to the administration that we have in power right now in Lansing. So what happens if we lose those offices? Are some of these policies in danger of being reversed?
Yeah, absolutely. Secretary of State's office, a new Secretary of State could come in, could rescind those policies. An Attorney General could decide a different interpretation regarding the birth certificate law. A governor could rescind executive orders. If there was a change on the configuration of the Michigan Supreme Court, they could overturn previous decisions. They can interpret it differently. And the same thing holds true in the reverse for Michigan's legislature. We know that for many years, because of the legislative majority, we're not able to move pro-LGBTQ legislation forward because the leadership won't allow that. A change in that, in terms of the result of the 2022 elections, might allow for pro-LGBTQ legislation to be able to move forward. We haven't been able to do that for more than 2 decades.
So it's really important that we get out there and vote
Absolutely.
and hopefully gain some seats in both houses.
Yeah, not only to get out and vote, but to vote informed and to know this information and have the conversations not only amongst members of the LGBT community, but our allies and our family members, anybody who cares about us and cares about our lives, so they have an understanding. I think a lot of times we find people making voting decisions based on not a lot of information. And this idea, sometimes you hear people, I'm not happy the way things are going, I want to change, but we really need to consider the consequences. I mean, I think it's very clear, any civil rights groups look at the results of the 2016 presidential election and the impact just on the federal courts, where President Trump was able to appoint and get confirmed more judges on that federal bench than probably any other president did in a 4-year term. Many of those judges who in the past issued opinions that were anti-LGBT and in many cases anti-civil rights cases. And those are lifetime appointments. And we will, for more than a generation, and we will see the impacts of those appointments. And that's certainly true of the United States Supreme Court. President Trump was able to appoint 3 justices to the United States Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And there is some concern that if the court is willing to undo legal precedent, like the right to be able to obtain an abortion, could the marriage equality decision be next up for a review? So yeah, your vote can really make a difference in the quality of your life and in the entire social justice movement.
So the message there is to educate the people around you as well as yourself. Make sure that you know that you're well informed and that your coworkers are well informed, your family is well informed, your friends and neighbors are well informed about just what is at stake.
Yeah. I think, in the past, we've heard, they don't make any difference. They're just politicians. They're all the same. There's no, that's simply not true in this polarized day and age where you can really see a significant difference in terms of policies and viewpoints. And, the other thing that we didn't mention, Amy, what we've seen in other state legislatures is this wholesale attack on the LGBT community in terms of legislation, and is mostly against the transgender community. Mm-hmm. And we are fortunate at this point in time to have a governor who makes it very clear, you pass these laws, I'm going to veto them. So, last year we had an anti-trans bill that would prohibit transgender high school students from being able to play sports in accordance with their gender identity. Well, we're seeing this kind of legislation being introduced all across the country, not only about the sports, but laws that would criminalize providing affirming health care to transgender youth. We're seeing legislation introduced that would prohibit the teaching in public schools, anything related to LGBTQ people, about the LGBTQ rights movement, in addition to issues involving racial discrimination and other things. It's this wholesale attack on knowledge and actually learning our actual history and facts. And many times when in Michigan, where you have a legislative majority, which is the Republican Party, and you have a Democrat governor, the ability to be able to veto legislation that clearly we believe might be unconstitutional, that's very important too.
Mm-hmm. Is there not a ballot initiative around voting? There's
recently a new ballot and another ballot initiative, but there's one, it's called Secure My Vote, and it's anything but securing one's vote. It puts prohibitions on the ability of people to participate in elections. And just as background, in 2018, a clear majority of Michigan voters approved a number of voting initiatives that made it more accessible for more people to participate in elections. So in other words, no excuse absentee balloting, the opportunity to be able to register to vote on the same day as an election. You know, that's pretty significant. And we know in 2020, it was because of some of that legislation that enabled more people to participate. So the proponents behind Secure My Michigan, my vote, they're alleging that somehow that there was some fraud in the 2020 elections, which simply is not the case in fact. But what they would do is they would require more restrictions on the ability to be able to obtain an absentee ballot. It would make it difficult to be able to vote if you don't bring your ID to the polls with a provisional ballot, or no, I'm sorry, to be able to vote and sign an affidavit, you'd have to do a provisional ballot, then you'd have to come back and produce your ID in order for your vote to be counted. They would prohibit additional resources and revenue to local counties and cities running elections if they needed more voting equipment or more staffing. It would just overall make it more difficult for people to participate in elections, which of course we don't want to do. We want to participate and you have to wonder, behind some of this legislation, why don't people want other people to vote? I mean, if you are the candidate that's going to appeal to people with your policies and what you propose to do, people will vote for you. But if you don't have policies that are supportive and are inclusive of all people, chances are some groups are not going to vote for you. And this way of trying to prevent either young people or poor people or people of color from being able to access the polls is clearly a form of voter suppression. So there's another ballot initiative, and I'm not that well versed on it, but what they would do is they would kind of make it clear that you can't get rid of some of these particular voter provisions from 2018, and that would allow more drop boxes to be available to make sure that we preserve the idea that one can register the same day as an election and be able to participate to vote.
Gotcha. So that's important in a number of ways.
Right, but also confusing for people when you get the petition, because you're going to have Secure My Vote and I'm trying to remember what the other thing, Protect My Vote, I think that's what one might be called, or access to voting. You want to make sure you know which one to sign and which one not to sign.
Which one not to sign, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because Secure My Vote sounds very attractive,
Sure.
but it's not really what it sounds like.
Right.
By any stretch of the imagination.
Right. And we were able, when it was the only voter initiative, to just don't sign anything, just don't sign a petition. But now with this other one, it's going to be important to be able to distinguish between the two.
Right. But there's an opportunity for more education there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's so important, just specifically even with our community, the LGBTQ community, that we really have an understanding of where we're at. I think sometimes there's a tendency in the media that with regards to the LGBTQ rights movement, well, you have the right to marry, everything's all set. But that's not the case. We only have 21 states that explicitly mention sexual orientation and gender identity and their civil rights laws. And we're also seeing a full-pronged attack in terms of even civil rights protections, where people of faith or organizations that are faith-based saying that they should be exempt from complying with civil rights laws and policies as they pertain to LGBTQ people because of either that individual or the organization's religious beliefs, even when they're not even engaging in religious activity. So we have a lot of challenges ahead, and it's so important that we stay well informed and that we stay engaged and that we participate. We can, unfortunately, in any kind of civil rights movement, you can never get to a point where you're just complacent, where you're just sitting back and resting on your laurels, because for every step you take forward, there are others trying to push you back.
Right. Yeah, it's it's said that the civil rights battle is never won. That what you gain today, you may lose tomorrow if you become complacent.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And we're seeing, in terms of this effort to re-engage in culture wars, with regards to a number of issues. Certainly, masks and the pandemic, the
Mhm.
teaching about racism and slavery in schools, and an attack on being supportive of particularly transgender students in schools.
Right. Why do you think transgender people are in particular? Is it because we're so vulnerable? Um,
I think it's a cynical political calculation by those who believe, they look at in terms of the gay and lesbian rights movement, and they found that in terms of the success with marriage equality was a result of changing hearts and minds. More and more people knew somebody who was gay or lesbian, friend, family member, colleague, neighbor, etc. They're banking on the fact that maybe people are less aware about what it means to be transgender, might not necessarily know someone who's transgender. And so because maybe the lack of information or understanding, they can play upon fear, as a result of ignorance. And they can make headway, in terms of with this kind of legislation and policy making. So, I think, Amy, you might have even attended that hearing last summer or heard about the hearing with the anti-trans sports bill, the stuff that the proponents were putting forward. They weren't
Right.
acknowledging what it means to be transgender. They were referring to a transgender female as a biological male. They refused to refer to the person by their appropriate pronouns, and it was, they believe they can do this. Now, they were unsuccessful years ago when they tried to legislate things about the bathroom. And it's our
Right.
hope that ultimately they'll be unsuccessful with this. But, you have others. Like I said, we're fortunate in Michigan. We have a governor who's not going to sign on to this stuff. Other states are not so fortunate. And so we'll have to see some court battles over some of this anti-trans legislation. And it's really going to depend on, the courts, what court you're in. And I don't know with this current United States Supreme Court. I'm not comfortable speculating that they will do the right thing right now with regards to LGBTQ rights.
Right. Right. I hear you. So what are some of the tactics, techniques that we can use to educate the public?
Yeah, I think we have to have conversations. I think the community, the LGBTQ community centers are incredible vehicles to be able to put together community gatherings and to share important information. I think that's a great way to get that out. So we have to have conversations. We have to provide people with information. We have to make sure that we we explain things well. Some of this stuff can seem awfully complicated. And, one of the challenges for a lawyer, you don't want to sound too legalese. You just have to put it in simple terms so people have an understanding. And you have to also give people the tools so they can have those conversations with their friends, with their family members, and to talk about these issues. So I'm hoping with this year's election, we're going to be able to come up with a one-page sheet that lists the positive things that have been happening and what's at stake in this election. And this is why you should vote and why you need to vote informed. And we also have to talk to members of our community. I don't get involved in that stuff. I don't want to hear about any politics. I just went through the presidential election. I get it. It's hard. It seems like every time we turn around, there's a new election. But this is a real crucial election in terms of where the state of Michigan is going, where our country is going, and whether or not we'll be able to continue some of the progress that we've made on LGBTQ rights. And it's going to be so important that people participate and that they really know what's at stake and that they communicate that with other people.
Right. So we're getting close on time here, but I wanted to touch on one thing that keeps popping up in Michigan in particular, and that is taking down of pride flags and other affirming symbols for the LGBTQ community in our public schools.
Right. Yeah. It's an issue that we're seeing all around the country, and it's really come up quite a bit in Michigan. And I think that's also a result of some activism on the other side, where a parent will complain about the presence of a pride flag and saying, well, that's not fair because, you wouldn't allow necessarily, I don't know. I don't think many people are arguing for the Ku Klux Klan flag, but you need to allow this flag or such an, and I think some school districts are misinterpreting what the law says regarding this issue and saying, well, if we allow the pride flag, it's a political statement by a teacher, then we have to allow political statements by other school staff. But no, the real way you can look at this is that if a school district decides that they are supportive of their LGBTQ students, that this is an important value that they hold, having the pride flag in the school is their own individual speech. It's not an open forum where then that means they have to allow other points of views. It's the school district statement. We value LGBTQ students. We want to be supportive of them. So we're going to allow to put a flag in a classroom or in the hallway or whatever. They can do this. They're not prohibited by law. It's not teacher speech or school staff speech. It's their own speech. So we're trying to communicate that to school districts that, if indeed that is their value, that they can do this sort of thing. And as you saw with Three Rivers, they reversed themselves, right? The school board, at least for this point in time, is allowing the flag to be there. And we just have to get that message out. I can see from the school district side of things, more people are showing up to these school board meetings and are being very vocal and being very aggressive, in terms, and you've heard about school board members' lives being threatened and being followed and stalked by community members or people just in the community themselves. And so a lot of them are scared, and they're scared of lawsuits. But the bottom line is that a school district legally and constitutionally can do this, that it's part of their own speech. And if the school district isn't willing to say that's part of our speech, then it's up to the community who elects the school board and approve, and who will select the superintendent to put pressure and say, look, we think this is an important value for our district. We want you to do this.
Oftentimes that pride flag hanging in a classroom or hanging in the cafeteria is a symbol that lets kids know that they are welcome, that they are affirmed and supported in their school setting, which helps them achieve. And oftentimes, it may be the only place where they do feel safe.
Sure. It might be the only place where they're getting support for who they are while they're in school. Right. Studies have shown, Amy, that the presence of a gay straight alliance, like a non-curricular club, really does that improve the school environment for LGBTQ kids, but for all kids, because it sends a message that, that we're supportive and that we support diversity. So, the presence of the flag can send an important message, not only to kids who say I'm gay or lesbian or bisexual or trans or gender non-binary, but also to other students who identify with a different group too.
Right. Well, Jay, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, Amy, thank you. Same here.
You're just an absolute fount of knowledge. And I thank you for all the work that you do and, every day, and that what the ACLU of Michigan has done here for us in the state. So with that, we're going to close out. This has been Living Out Front. And my guest today was Jay Kaplan, Staff Attorney for the LGBT HIV project at the ACLU of Michigan. Thank you so much, Jay.
Thank you so much, Amy. It was a pleasure.